Okay, here we are, Character Moments Lesson 3. This one I'm calling Finding the Shot Through Rhythm. I'm going to go over how I sometimes find my shot through rhythm. So in this instance, I'll be viewing it from the point of view of an action shot that I did a while back, and I'll be using that as an example. So just to be clear about finding the shot through rhythm, right, and what it is exactly. It's just another method of finding a shot, but starting from the rhythm and the energy. So I find sometimes that once you have those two kind of figured out, all of the other aspects can be somewhat interchangeable and it'll still read pretty clearly. So ultimately, you'll still go about animating your shot whichever way you find most comfortable. This is just a different method of planning. And it doesn't only have to be applied to an action shot. It can be applied to acting shots. In this instance or in this course, we'll be applying it to our character intro, right? And it's important to note that this may not be for everybody. There's a chance that this may make no sense to you. It's a fairly organic process, which I'm very much a fan of. I'm very much a gut animator. I really enjoy like the feeling of animating from the gut and kind of feeling things out as you make your way through. And this may seem like complete nonsense to you and a way maybe not to animate your shot, but I personally love it. So the first thing that we'll do is whenever we get our shot assignment, and this doesn't have to be necessarily a shot. I just use the term shot, but it can be, let's say, a gameplay animation, or it can be a character intro like we're doing, right? First thing that you do or you should do is you should do the homework. So if we're looking at things from the perspective of a shot, right? We'll get our kickoff. We'll study the layout and the previs. We'll study the shot, the character, the sequence, what's happening, what needs to happen, what can happen, what's going to happen, what's already happened, etc. Everything, right? So when you're beginning to see the choices in your head, all of this will give you a pretty clear idea of what the shot is going to be. And during this time, right, you want to do your best to answer as many questions as possible. That way, once you get to the Maya portion or when it comes down to actually animating it, all that's left is execution, right? So you want to make sure to eliminate all of the not only artistic guesswork but the technical guesswork too. So you want to go through and check the rig if you're implementing it into game, making sure you have everything hooked up correctly. You have a way to test it properly because that's going to be a very big thing that we'll be talking about in our next lesson, especially if it's not shot work. You want to be able to view it in its truth in the way the audience is going to be viewing it, right? So, all of these things that you'll be figuring out, like while you do your homework, will give you very clear boundaries of the box that you'll have to create this animation in, right? So, after I've done my homework, I'll then try and absorb all of it, and I'll go back and then I'll think about like my assignment and just continue to think and ask myself, right? I'll ask very kind of pointed questions about what about this animation speaks the loudest to me, right? What about this animation can I see in my mind's eye the clearest? Or what's the strongest feeling that I'm getting when I'm absorbing all of this audio and I'm trying to understand what this animation should be doing and like the purpose of it is. So a little bit about finding a connection to your animation, right? The interesting thing about that is it's different. It's different for everybody because we're all so different in our artistic upbringing. Every one of us will connect to something different, and we should be, right? We're individuals and we're artists, and so we should be connecting to something different. And it could be a number of things, right? You could be connecting to the feeling of it, a specific moment, maybe there's a sense of nostalgia to it, that kind of sense memory that kind of brings you back to something in your own experiences. Maybe it's a certain animation aspect. So for me personally, when it comes to connecting with something and connecting with a certain animation aspect, it's normally one of two things will always speak loudest to me just because of the way I kind of view animation in my head and the way I kind of piece it together, right? The poses will speak loud to me, or it will be the rhythm. And so when it is Either one of those things, right? It's going to dictate what workflow I'll end up using. So, um, after I've kind of found a feeling or an urge that I want to follow, that will dictate the workflow that I will use, right? Whatever speaks loudest to me will kind of dictate my workflow. So, if it's the poses, there's a whole set of things that I'll be chasing and looking for when I do this, right? I'll be doing lots of drawing. I'll most likely be doing a lot of stepped keys, very heavy blocking, somewhat of a more traditional approach, I suppose. But just so we're all on the same page, when I speak about rhythm, I'm basically talking about a combination of when things hit and how things hit, right? And how they relate to one another. And all that essentially is a combination of timing and spacing, right? When things hit and how things hit basically comes down to timing and spacing. And so when the rhythm speaks loudest to me, the workflow that I'll use is called the sing along ball workflow. That's what I like to call it because that's what it reminds me of the most. This is a method I was doing a lot more when I was doing 2D animation, very way earlier on. And I've kind of adapted it to doing 3D animation, and it works pretty well for me. It's not something that's new. I first started doing it just because it made sense to me. Then I remember seeing like a tutorial or breakdown a long time ago, which told me some people do it. I haven't seen much about it in general, so I thought it'd be a good thing to share. Okay, so the first step would be kind of like hearing the rhythm, internalizing it, and turning it into something useful, right? So this might be a little strange, so please bear with me. But when you recognize like the rhythm of what you want, you can normally kind of hear it in your head, and you can feel it when you like verbalize it, right? I found that it pretty closely resembles a number of things, but I think the one exercise that will pretty much work more often than not is if you try and describe what you want your animation to feel like to someone else. Chances are there's going to be something that you're going to be able to latch onto that will give you a sense of like the timing and the spacing. Okay, so the most practical and probably relatable example I can describe or I can use as an example of hearing the rhythm, right? And kind of describing the rhythm to someone else and extracting useful information out of it is whenever, let's say, there is a car coming really fast from really far away and they zip by you, right? And you try and describe that to someone, or you try and verbalize it yourself. What does that always sound like, right? It always sounds like "Meow." And so there are a couple of other examples like that. Like if there's a bomb dropping from a plane very high up, right? There are tons of examples like that. And if you notice, the change in pitch and intonation and the volume all directly correlate to timing and spacing. And so if you're trying to describe your animation to someone, like maybe you want it to feel very heavy. And so like your description to them would like be something along the lines of it sounding like right. Um just like I was acting out and just like I was describing with the sounds that I was making, all of that directly correlates to timing and spacing. And so let's try and put this into a more practical use case. So that's where like the sing along ball workflow comes in, right? Because all of that is very great, but it's very abstract, all right? And we'll only be able to pull useful and information out of it if we understand it, we understand what we want out of it, and there are certain things that we can directly connect that to in our animation, and like even actually as direct as curves in Maya. So let's go ahead and go through it. Okay, so to start in the sing along ball workflow, I start with just a ball, just a red ball, and I'll put a null node above it. And that null node I'll align to the camera that I'm using, my shot camera, right? And so now that those two, the null node and the ball, are exactly aligned with the camera, I'll offset the ball just a little bit from the camera. That way I can see it when I'm looking through my shot cam. And then I'll constrain that null node to my camera. That way, wherever my camera is moving, my ball will always stay in screen space and it'll stay in relation to my camera. So very lastly, I'll add the ball to a display layer that I can constantly turn on and off if I need to. That way, I'll always have it to look back to when I'm animating and use it as like a point of reference, right? It's very similar to how some people keep like earlier blocking versions of their shot up while they're splining to keep referencing back so they're constantly reminded of what their initial intentions were. Okay, so then I'll animate the ball in camera space based on the rhythm that I've established in my head. And this ball I'll use as a representation of the feeling of the rhythm I hear in my head. But sometimes it's more representative of the energy that you want out of the entire shot, certain beats, or a combination of both the rhythm and the energy, right? And so if we were to think about like the bomb dropping or the car whizzing by us really fast and like what that would look like on the ball, right? So if we were talking about intonation and we're talking about volume, we were relating that to timing and spacing, right? If we were just translating up and down in animating on TY, let's take the car for example. What that might look like is if you can imagine my fist as the ball, and along with the sound effects, it would be something like this, right? It would be something like, right? And so you can see how there's a direct correlation between the sound effects that we're kind of mimicking and making and the ball that we're animating. And I know a lot of this is a little bit abstract, and we're going to do this. I'm going to do this on my shot in particular, in my character moment. That way you guys can see it in action. But also, um, I'll show you guys the context of this method from the action shot that I was talking about prior. So, okay, so here we are in Sing Sketch, and we're taking a look at what a sing-along ball pass kind of looks like, right? So this is a direct kind of translation or manifestation of the timing and the rhythm and the texture and kind of the shape change that I wanted out of this action shot that I was working on. So let's take a look. Okay, cool. So you can see from the ball itself, there's somewhat of a cadence to it in the beginning. I've established some kind of like a semblance of like kind of timing and spacing. And like I've been using the squash and stretch, the scale to represent like the shape change that I want in some of the poses. And you can see there's a point at which like the established rhythm is kind of interrupted. There's a little bit of texture on the way down from here, and there's this big hang in the air right here, and it comes to a resolution here. So, I know it's abstract, and I know it doesn't look like anything now. Later on, after I provide a little bit more context, we're going to look at the sing-along ball pass alongside the blocking pass of the animation. That way, you guys can kind of make the connection between the two and see the correlation between the two and how useful it can be. Okay, so that was our sing-along ball pass. And so after you have animated your ball and you're happy with it, you can use the curve that's created as a roadmap. So here you can see in this image, I've got a screenshot of the TY curve of the ball, right? So the curve will naturally suggest to you when and where you can place things, like your peaks, your valleys, your accents, opportunity for contrast, for texture, etc. You can treat your curve as an animation clothesline, as I like to call it. So you can then use this in conjunction with poses that you've drawn or video reference that you've shot or references that you've pulled from somewhere else. I'll show you guys what I mean by breaking it down a little bit and going through all of the other animation choices using this example and kind of showing you guys how this sing-along ball can inform your animation, right? So this is my animation clothesline. It's basically the TY curve just blown up a little bit. And so you can naturally begin to see where things will hit and how things will hit, right? If we're looking at this like we would in the graph editor, it gives us a very good sense of timing and spacing. So I'm using the TY as my roadmap because that's obviously the axis that I've animated in. And whichever axis you predominantly use while animating your sing along ball, that's the curve that you would use. I'm only using 2y because I was animating it up and down, right? But if you decide to do it left to right, yeah, whatever makes the most sense to you, use your most dominant curve. And for mine, it's TY. And I've just outlined it in red, just to be clear. My TY curve is not red. I just outlined it a little bit, just so it's a little bit more clear in the video. Okay. So that we know that in Maya, right, time stretches across the graph editor horizontally and the values stretch vertically, right? But when doing the sing-along ball, I find it a little bit more helpful to think of the vertical value as contrast. And so you can begin to see in the curve where you'll be getting your biggest points of contrast through your peaks and valleys, right? So using this curve in relation to posing, I kind of quote unquote hang my poses on my animation clothesline. And so now knowing what poses I'm going to use where, especially while watching like the sing along ball pass, you can kind of begin to see clearer in your head what your result is going to be. Like I personally either draw or thumbnail out my poses, but you can get your poses from anywhere you want, like I had mentioned, whether it's from video reference, um, reference that you shoot yourself. You can get it from notes from other people, from comic books, wherever, right? And so you can kind of see like the cadence in the beginning where there's like a little bit of an established rhythm. I've got like my run thumbnail for the pose that I want, and so on and so forth, right? At every peak and at every valley of the curve, you can begin to see what poses I want where. And this is part of what I was talking about in being as detailed as you can and answering as many questions as possible, right? That way, once you get to Maya, it's just about execution. So, kind of based off of the poses that you decide to put in certain spots and the principle of like time and contrast, right? You can determine where your accents are and where there can be pockets for texture. So based off of this, in the first few poses, you can see that I'll be getting this amount of contrast during like the running portion. I'll be getting this amount of contrast from when he jumps to when he like hangs on to, I guess this wall. And you can see where my biggest points of contrast will be right here, right? Where there's a long stretch of time where there's not a lot of change. Those are perfect places for texture, like places like this, right? So this is where you have to be an artist about it and kind of judge and kind of modulate how much texture you want to add, where you're going to need it, if you need texture at all. I personally decided like that since we're getting from one pose to another pretty quickly, especially in a run, right? Like here, it doesn't need much texture at all, right? All the other principles should more than take care of that motion and make it feel pretty good, like overlap, lead and follow, etc. But there's going to be places where there's going to be a long stretch of time. There's not going to be a lot of change, right? So these poses later on, right? It takes a little bit longer and has a little bit more contrast. But because there's so much time that passes without like a really big pose change, it might be a good place to add texture for either timing or some kind of shape change, right? So I knew I wouldn't need necessarily a lot of texture, but just like bigger texture, right? And so you can see that I've tried to hang these poses here, and I've kind of tried to. Hopefully, it shows well enough in the recording, but I tried to outline um, and kind of visualize potential texture in this light blue. I know that was a lot to take in, and again, it's pretty abstract, but after I've put all these ingredients in the pot, like it'll most likely, more than likely, give me a good first pass to show where all of my ideas are laid out. They're clear. It's a great place to make changes if you need it. And so now we'll be looking at the sing along ball alongside the blocking animation. Okay, so here we are in Sing Sketch, and again, and I have my sing along ball down here, and I've got it against my blocking of my animation here. So let's take a look at this and watch it one time through. And then I'll go back and talk about a couple of things that I'd like to point out in particular. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, cool. So now seeing the sing along ball alongside my blocking animation, hopefully the correlation between the two makes a little bit more sense. You can see where I've kind of like implemented my poses alongside like um, where that kind of resides in my animation clothesline and basically my TY curve. Um, so you can see the comparison with the animation of the ball, how certain things are represented and like they become manifested in the situation or in the animation. Not just with the sing along ball, but alongside like where I decided to put texture, identifying my contrasts, and where I decided to like hang my poses, right? Okay, so that was our blocking pass alongside our sing along ball. Um, Hopefully that gives you a good comparison of the anim and how things are represented and how they become manifested in the actual animation and not just a bouncing ball. So there are a couple more extended uses that I have the ball or that I use the ball for. But before we go over those, I want to make sure that it's clear to make sure to use the workflow that works best for you. Okay. Aside from just the sing along ball workflow, there are plenty of other workflows that are out there, but make sure to use the one that works best for you. If you're curious to try this one out, definitely try it. You may pick up a thing or two. But from the point that I had showed, that blocking pass, from that point on, you can use whatever workflow to animate that works best for you. In this particular instance, as you can tell, I did like a more heavy stepped blocking approach. um, that's not always the case though. My workflow will change depending on the needs of what I'm animating. Whether it's like heavy stepped, whether it's layered, whether it's copied pairs, whatever else, right? I adapt my workflow um, to the needs of what I'm animating. Okay, so some extended information and some additional context about the sing along ball workflow, right? So the way that I've demonstrated it, um, I've kind of adapted sound effects or like my description of what I want the rhythm and the time to be in a ball, right? But there are different methods in getting your rhythm. So 99% of the time I'll use a ball, but you can definitely use other things. Like, for example, you can use an audio track of yourself making the actual sound effects, just like I was doing earlier. Bring that into Maya and use that as where you want to put your accents and kind of dictate your rhythm and your timing, your spacing. You can use a mouse recording. There are programs out there, just like TV Paint, where you can hit record. You can hold down your mouse button and kind of like draw something with your mouse, or like make motions with your mouse, and it'll record it. There's even a version of that that you can use in Maya that will basically record your actions over time with whatever you have selected. So if it's a locator or if it's a ball, you hit record and you draw like the timing with your mouse. It'll give you something to work from. But let's say, for example, you're doing it with sound, right? So if you're using sound and there's a sound wave right here, just like you would, and let's say, for example, I can't necessarily remember what this sound wave is, but let's say, for example, like this is a sound wave of myself trying to describe where I want things to hit and how things to hit, right? Like maybe it's like boom, 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 right? Something like that. um, so you can use this to kind of identify where you want things to hit, how you want things to hit, and if you trace like the spine of this sound wave, you'll basically get a an animation clothesline. or something somewhat resembling a curve that you might be able to use. Okay, so aside from those different ways that you can establish your rhythm and basically record your rhythm, there are a couple of things that I wanted to call out that can be somewhat dangerous, hence the phrase "it's a trap." So when using this method, there are a few things to keep in mind, right? Just to make sure you stay out of trouble. Um, I find that this method goes way more smoothly if you already have an idea of what you want, right? Sure, the rhythm may be the most clear to you, but you should have like a rough idea of what you want for everything else, right? So when we were going through the example, I had an idea of what I wanted for the posing, and I had an idea of basically like the homework, right? This character needs to climb up the box, get over one box to another box, etc., etc. Okay. Be aware of conflicting rhythms. So let's say, for example, what you're animating already has a very established rhythm, whether it comes down to um, what's supposed to be happening. Let's say they're dodging explosions, or let's say they're shooting some kind of weapon. And in the boards or in the layout or in whatever you're given to start with, there's a very clear rhythm for it already. And so trying to put a rhythm on top of that, that's kind of conflicting with its or with what's already there and not working with what's already there, it's going to get you into more trouble than is necessary, quite honestly, right? Because if there is an existing rhythm, make sure you pay attention to it, make sure you honor it, and make sure you work with it, right? If you have kind of two rhythms combating one another, like nothing is going to be clear. And at that point, um, it's highly likely that you won't be able to use this workflow probably to its you know to its potential. So let's say, for example, going back to the sound wave, if there is an existing rhythm, right, definitely use it. So, just like I had mentioned before, when trying to trace along the spine of this sound wave, you can see here that this would be our curve, right? And if we're looking at it like this, and this is our curve, right, we can identify the peaks and the valleys. So, where things are at a high, where things are at a low, and by using those, we can determine where our accent is, right? Where we want to build up to and build down from. But then we can also identify pockets of texture, right? So there's a big stretches here where basically nothing is happening, and those are perfect places for texture. Okay, so that is the sing along ball kind of workflow, finding your shot through rhythm. I'm going to attempt to use this method in my layout pass, which we'll be doing next.